So this is Dr. Beth Haynes. She's the Executive Director of the Benjamin Rush Institute. She got her MD from the University of Cincinnati, her residency at Wisconsin. She's board certified in both family medicine and emergency medicine. And she's been involved in health policy for the past 10 years. And then we also have Dr. Johnathan Ross, who got his MD actually from Medical College of Ohio, right here. He got his Master's in Public Health from the University of Michigan. He is the former president of Physicians for a National Health Program and a former member of the Ohio State Medical Board. He is an associate clinical professor of internal medicine here at UT, and he's an internist at St. Vincent Mercy Medical Center, also here in Toledo. So without further ado, we'll have Dr. Haynes start us off.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for coming. I got to set up my timer so that we can try and really get equal amount of time for each of us. First off, I have to say as a disclaimer, these are my personal opinions. Benjamin Rush primarily is trying to be a platform for open discussion. It is unapologetically in favor of freedom of choice for doctors and patients and making the doctor-patient relationship central to any kind of health policy decisions that we have, which ends up leading us to support, because we believe in that freedom of choice and maximizing freedom of choice, we end up supporting free enterprise system as a significant part. So, but the rest of what I'm going to say really has to do with how I view it personally. So I don't want you to conflate those. We want to have a big conversation amongst as many people as we can in order to really make sure we're looking at all the different points of view. So today we're debating about the merits of for-profit or profit system, or going outside of that in how we handle healthcare matters. And I think we can't even begin to talk about profits in healthcare or not until I address some of what I think are some misconceptions about the profit system in general. I think there are very strong arguments, both morally and practically, in favor of structuring our economic system based on profits. The moral arguments would include the fact that for the principle of self-ownership, and that property rights and profits as a subset of property are things that have to do with self-ownership. You own yourself, you own your labor, you own the fruits of your labor, and as long as you're honest and your exchanges are voluntary, you have a right to have any excess value that you have created in that economic exchange. One of the problems that we have when we get into talking about profits is that people forget we're not really in a profit system, we're in a profit and loss system. And that by definition, profits are simply a mathematical calculation. That's all they are. They're saying if you can bring in more revenue than it costs you to produce a good or a service, that's the profit. And that profit is a signal of the excess wealth, the greater prosperity that has been created in those economic exchanges. The loss part of that is if it costs you more to create a good or a service than you can actually obtain in a voluntary exchange, that's wealth destruction. That's ratcheting back our sense of prosperity and the amount of resources that we have to take care of people. So I think the only way that we actually can figure out the most efficient way to use our resources to benefit individuals grouped as a whole is through this voluntary exchange that looks at profit and loss. I think voluntary exchange is one of the most benevolent and democratic systems that we have for trying to figure out how to manage our resources. It's why we talk about making money in a free enterprise system, not taking money, because we're creating excess wealth. And in a system of voluntary exchanges, it's win-win. Both parties have concluded that they're going to be better off after participating in a voluntary exchange. You only get into win-lose when there's lie, cheat, steal, or some kind of coercion that's involved. People do not voluntarily, and yes, there's limited choices. They may not like the choices that they have, but they always conclude in a voluntary thing that they're better off. One of the things that profits gets a bad name about is that it means exploitation. It means taking advantage of people. But that's not what you're going to learn in business school, that the way to succeed in business is to cheat your customers, cheat your suppliers, exploit your employees. It's not. My best financial interest as a physician is to put the interests of my patients first. And that's how, in a free exchange system, I am going to actually benefit. And if I'm giving a shoddy product that costs too much, that actually is not in my own best self-interest either. And one of the ways to try and get a handle on how the profits work is to look at this in a more worldwide, broad spectrum point of view. One of the things that I think is very little appreciated is that every system of healthcare in the world consists of a mix of government, nonprofit, and profit. Every single system. North Korea probably has the least. They're mostly government, but I bet there's a strong part of black market that's going on in there. So even within North Korea, there's going to be a significant market that's occurring. Then it's our job to try and figure and tease out what's causing the success, what's causing the efficiency, and what is causing the problems, what's dragging it down. If you look at how the world is pulling itself out of poverty, there's this very strong correlation with the more economic freedom that you have, and that means recognition of property rights, including the right to the profits that you make. That's where we're seeing the most prosperity. And the wealthier a country, so the more freedom, the more economic freedom, the wealthier the country. The more wealth you have, the healthier are your citizens. So I can show you I could show you some graphs of that, but I wanted to get to a lot more points. Within the U.S. economy, we can also think about where are the places in the U.S. economy that are the most free, and which are the least free. And I would say within the U.S. economy, we've got to look at two very highly regulated, by meaning there's a lot of control and saying you have to have this product, and where there's price controls, there's a lot of subsidies, there's taxes. Two of the most involved by the government are education and healthcare. And this is where we're seeing quality stagnate and prices go up. Some of the most economically free segments within the U.S. economy are the places we're seeing the most innovation. We're seeing prices come down, quality goes up, and that's the areas of high tech and internet. So we're looking across the world. We have economic freedom, which is associated with bringing people out of absolute poverty and increasing prosperity, health, and wealth. And even within our own economy, we're seeing the places where we have the most property rights and profit being allowed. We're getting better prices and better quality. What about within healthcare? Because people will say healthcare is different. Unfortunately, in healthcare, it is that segment that is very highly regulated, very highly controlled, and a lot of distortion of what's going on in those economic transactions. But the very small segment of healthcare markets that's allowed to be free are seeing prices go down and quality go up. That includes things like cosmetic surgery and LASIK surgery. It's also the areas of medical tourism, and we're seeing that internationally, we're seeing that within our country as well. Direct pay primary care is another spot where we're seeing quality go up and prices come down. The LASIKs and the cosmetic surgery, people will say, well, those are elective things, those aren't life and death threatening. But those are the only areas in our country that are actually being allowed to function on a really market basis. So we can't use the rest of it as a real comparison. And my phone shut off. Where am I time-wise? Okay. So what are some of the arguments against profits, and what are the things that I have to say against it? One of the things I've read in quite a bit of the literature, and particularly in the literature for those who are advocating for single payer, they lump profits in as an administrative cost or waste, an unnecessary expense. And I would disagree with that. I think that we need those profits to be able to signal what is an efficient use of resources, and without it, you can't figure it out. But I'd also challenge somebody who says we need to get rid of profits is what's the alternative? Because the only alternative that I'm really seeing being presented is you are taking away choices from the individual and you're handing it to a select group of what ends up being politically powerful individuals deciding how those resources are going to be allocated. So I believe more in the crowdsourcing. I think it's more democratic, it's more freedom producing. It also ends up giving the kinds of signals that we need to really be able to figure out what's efficient. Another argument is that profits are related to greed. Well, profits are related to self-interest. That's true. I don't think that there's more self-interest in the market and there's less self-interest in politics. I don't think there's, and so I don't think there's more or less greed in politics or in markets. And I would say you even need to have self-interest operating in nonprofits. Within the system that we have now with the nonprofits, they're run pretty much like businesses, only instead of calling it a profit, they call it, we're getting excess revenue. And if you're familiar at all with public choice theory, that has to do with the fact that people act according to their self-interest regardless of what the institution they're involved with. It's not even fair to call what comes out of nonprofits as profits, because there's so much subsidization and special treatment, special interests, and in a sense cronyism that comes along with that they're actually called rents. So it's a whole different thing because it's not really a fully voluntary exchange. So greed exists everywhere. I've got some other arguments, but
Keep going.
Okay. I'm almost done. The other thing that we hear is that it's just not right. It's just not right that a country as wealthy as ours doesn't guarantee everybody access. I think that's a whole different debate, and that's not what we're debating right now. But there's, even if I was to grant you that principle, there is nothing in that says the best way to achieve that goal is nonprofit and government, and that profit is the wrong way to go. So it's a different argument. And that there's all sorts of arguments too about healthcare being different. Information asymmetry, the doctor knows more than the patient, you can't shop in an emergency, and I've got reasons why I don't think those are relevant arguments that I'll go into if we have time and interest in the rebuttal. But in summary, the last one I do want to address, the healthcare is a right. You can claim that it is a right, but even in the countries that claim that healthcare is a right, people do not actually have a right to healthcare. All they have, practically, is access to whatever medical care the government is willing and able to pay for. So in every system, profit, nonprofit, and government, we have scarce resources. There will be people who need them and want them, but we can't meet every need. And it's a matter of what is the best way to figure out how to do that. So profits emanate, I think, from the principle of self-ownership and the equal right of every individual, every single individual, to their own life, to their own liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the fruits of their own labor. I think that the profit system is incomparable to any other as far as maximizing our ability to interact with each other voluntarily. And it's the only system which allows true price signals, which unfortunately, because of time, I haven't been able to go into that aspect of it in great detail. But prices and efficiency are a process of discovery, and if you suppress them the way that the price signals have been actively suppressed in the United States for over 100 years now, you don't have the signals that you need to really properly allocate the resources. So it's not based on a utopian theory of we're all just going to be nice to each other. It's how do you harness those self-interests which exist everywhere. And I think there's plenty of evidence that shows across countries, across time, across industries, across segments of the U.S. healthcare system, that profits are superior both morally and practically for trying to figure out how to get people the healthcare that they need. Okay. 3-minute rebuttal?
Sure, go for it. Hi, I agree, thanks for coming. This could be pretty dull, but I bet it's not going to be. So I was on the state medical board. What are we doing with the state medical board? Well, a profession is self-educating, self-regulating, and puts the interests of the people they serve ahead of their own. Self-interest, that's profits. We can't be a profession if we're all into profits. I'm just summarizing. I could talk long on that. It's ethical issues, complex. I'm sure we could have a long discussion. We can do that later if you want. Let's talk about the actual economic transaction. You're gonna buy this tie. You're gonna buy it, or I'm pulling the trigger. That's a ruptured appendix in the emergency room. That's a ruptured appendix in the emergency room. It's a transaction under duress. Now you should think about how many things out there in healthcare are actually transactions under duress. When you're not prepared either by your education, your capability of knowing what it is that you need. There are many transactions in healthcare that are not under duress. And I think there's an argument there. But the vast majority of transactions under duress are the most expensive transactions. So in terms of using market forces to actually control healthcare costs, it's a fairly small segment that's going to be able to be adjusted. And theoretically, if you're being a good doctor, you're giving patients what they need because you're concerned about their self-interest, not yours, not what they want. You know, if I go into a store, I'm going to buy what I want. If I go into a doctor, I expect them to advise me about what I need. In terms of wealth, creating better health, that's true. But the actual more important differential in health between countries is the economic disparity. So the greater the distance is between the rich and the poor, for countries with equal average income, you'll get worse health where there's economic disparity. So if you were to say, Dr. Ross, what's the single thing you would do that would be most important for improving the health of the American people? It would be to eliminate poverty. I mean, that's facetious, right? Hard to do. She talked about profits as being an administrative waste. Profits really are not the problem. It's excess administration chasing those profits. And I'll show you the data. I think I covered my rebuttal. So, shall I proceed?
So yeah, no, 10 minutes.
Yeah. Do you want to mic me? Because I can speak plenty loud for you guys to hear me, but I don't know if it will record, so. Time to do that. That's just second, so I can advance. So, slides are up. I'm going to run through, believe it or not, 30 of them in less than 15 minutes. So hold on to your seats because it's going to blast. So why are we worried about health reform? Costs are out of control. We're double our competitors. Every one of those dollars goes into our products. We can't sell them overseas. Outcomes of care, mediocre at best, even though we spend twice as much as our economic competitors. Access to care, deteriorate despite the highest costs in the world. Ever-increasing numbers of working people who are uninsured. So let me kind of see if I do this right. Here's the number of uninsured Americans, starting in the 70s, up by about 1 million every year until Obamacare came along. I'm no defender of Obamacare, don't ask me to do it. So we've got a problem. We've got 40 million people. That's more than all of Canada uninsured. There's our costs. Double our economic competitors. You have to ask yourself why. We're the most competitive, market-driven system in the world. Our costs are twice as high. That's exactly the opposite of what economic theory would tell you it should be. And I'm sure Beth has some reasons why that do go back to bad markets, but a lot of this stuff I don't think the market can cure. Here's change in real family income, right? You're seeing our costs. How is a family that's making $20,000 a year supposed to afford $8,000 per person in healthcare costs? Do the math, it don't work, right? And the bottom group is the one that's most likely, because they've had very little income growth, to be able to afford the almost double-digit costs that healthcare had been doing the last 20 years or so. Here's the deductibles we're all facing, all right? Back in 2006, only 10% of people in this country had a deductible greater than $1,000. Now 41% have deductibles over $1,000 a year. $1,000 for a low-income person is a bankrupting event. And it's the single highest cost of bankruptcy in America is healthcare costs. They're the contributing factor. Here's what happens if you're sick. Not only do you have some out-of-pockets, the blue, you've got yellow, which is your portion of the premium you pay out of your wages. And so the sick and the unhealthy pay the biggest piece of money. They've got double the out-of-pocket costs. Again, do the math, it doesn't work. And when you've got high out-of-pocket costs, including something like a high-deductible health plan, you're going to skip care. And when you skip care, you get sicker. When you get sicker, you get more expensive or dead or both. Here's some stats real quick. Our life expectancy, despite spending twice as much as these other countries, it's poor compared to them. This is the most telling graph. This is the potential years of life lost due to treatable illness across different countries. We are almost double Sweden and Japan in terms of the healthy years of life lost per 100 people per year to treatable causes. We are not doing a good job. Infant mortality, worst among our economic competitors again. Maternal mortality, I mean, this is like, we should be ashamed. We should want to go and hide somewhere with that kind of data next to our European competitors. Profits aren't a problem. We spend almost $3 trillion, 3,000 billion per year. These are the profits. It doesn't even quite add up to 100 billion. It's not the profits that these people make. Somewhere else is where the big healthcare costs are coming from. And it's basically chasing the money to pay for care because the infrastructure has to be supported. It won't be there for anybody if we don't all support it. We don't all need the hospital on any given day, but boy, isn't it nice to have a hospital if you're really, really sick. And everybody's got to support that infrastructure. So a big piece of healthcare cost is the infrastructure, and it's got to be there ahead of time. You can't build a new hospital just when you suddenly get sick. If only rich people could afford a hospital, there'd be one in Columbus, and the rich people here would die before they could get there. So if you want the infrastructure, you've got to pay for it. It's not the profits. On the other hand, the profit motive is toxic in healthcare, in my personal opinion, and I'll avoid talking more about that, in a sense, because I just want to show you the data. This is the data. For-profit hospitals. They make up about 13% of U.S. hospitals, 19% higher costs. Most of it is admin, because they're really chasing the money there. And it's hard to chase money, it's complicated, because every insurer has a different set of rules. And their death rates are 2.2% higher. These are meta-analyses of multiple studies, so it's pretty good data, and both of those are statistically significant. So 2% higher death rate with these hospitals. They actually hire fewer nurses. They have more admin, less nurses. Here's for-profit dialysis. Almost all of dialysis in America is now for-profit. You know, it's owned by big corporate entities. You know, 9% higher death rates, again, in the meta-analysis. Hospice. I used to be a medical director for a nursing agency and for hospice for a while. Okay, I did it for nothing. It was something that I felt was needed in the community in a voluntary service. It is now going for profit. Many of the home care agencies are going to do it. It's gone from being only 6% in 1993 for profit to over 57% for profit by 2011. I think it's almost 2/3 now when I heard the latest data on for-profit hospice. And they avoid the more complicated patients and dump those back to not-for-profit hospice and dump them back to public hospice services. So they try, because hospice is kind of a fixed payment, so they cherry pick. And this is one of the problems that we're going to see. In a competitive environment where profit is the motive rather than care is the motive, there's going to be a tendency to cherry pick. 20% of the patients generate almost 80% of the healthcare costs. Those are the sickest, most complicated patients. Those are the ones that have the least ability to negotiate in an economic environment. But they make up 80% of the costs. So even if you had a functioning environment at the lower end, she was talking about things like cosmetic surgery, where I have no objection to a market in those areas. No one's going to die if they don't get a facelift, right? They might die if they do, but they won't die if they get one. So I'm not worried about that. The insurance industry are the ones who've been doing the cherry picking for the most part. Because all you have to do is get a little bit more of those sick people as an insurance company, given you're taking a fixed premium across those people. You get a few more of the sick ones, you're bust. 10% extra of the sick ones, when they generate 80% of the cost, you're now 8% under budget and you're going to go bankrupt. Do the flip, avoid 10% of that 20%, and you're a rich company. And so they've been doing it. This is evidence from New England Journal, HMOs in Florida. What would happen is people, when they joined a Medicare HMO, were actually about 1/3 healthier in terms of medical costs. But they have the voluntary ability to leave the HMO, economic decision-making. They leave, guess what? It's the sick ones who leave. They're 80% higher in the first 6 months coming out. So and that's called cherry-picking and lemon dropping, and believe me, they've been doing it. One of the things that happened in Obamacare, which I do agree with, is they said you can't do that anymore. And they're trying to come up with ways to have insurance companies still able to take on sick people without necessarily having to do this, but they still do it. Because the adjustments that you need for sick people require you to be honest about whether they're sick or not. And so here's United Healthcare, which I consider the antichrist of insurance companies. These guys have a subunit, Pacific Care. They all eat each other. There's huge mega mergers going on. $2,400 per enrollee. They boosted the appearance that their patients were sick when they weren't really sick. You go to the record, the things they were saying, oh, these are really sick people, they weren't really sick. Or they said they've got severe blood pressure problems or severe kidney failure, they didn't. So they lied. Profits at stake, they're going to lie. That's basically what the real experience in the real world is. Same thing on quality scores. This is HEDIS, which is kind of a quality set of measures. This is just one of them. Don't give bad drugs to old people. They lied. They said they weren't doing it. They were by about 5% more. All of which is supposed to be paid for performance, paid for value, it's paid for lying. And that's what we're seeing. Why? Profits are at stake. Well, in the mid-2000s or so, a lot of this stuff was getting out. Seniors were beginning to figure out, there's some bad stuff going down in HMOs. They began to leave. Several HMOs were told, no, we're not going to overpay you anymore. The way it happened was about 12% overpayment happening with HMOs. You can see that pink, that's the overpayments that were happening because they enrolled healthier people. That's the cherry picking. And then what happened was they said, oh, we're going to drop. And here in Ohio, almost 100,000 seniors lost coverage. Almost 100,000. They said, no, we're not going to do Medicare HMOs anymore. And that kind of panicked legislators, and they all said, well, we'll give you more money if you stay in the business. So that's the rest of the pink. And now it's up to like 14, 16, depending on what you read, extra dollars per Medicare enrollee per year to be in the for-profit environment of HMOs in Medicare. It's called the Medicare Advantage Plan. Hospital mergers, the yellow is the for-profit hospitals. I told you they make up 13% of hospitals. You can see they make up way more than that of the mergers. Why do people merge? For economic power. That's why they merge. And of course, they're trying, even the normal hospitals are trying to establish economic power. And so we've got this merger mania going on. I don't have time to talk about it. Same thing happened to the doctors. They're all in a panic now. So the people you need to worry about are not the government. It's going to be your corporate future masters. That's who you need to worry about. Because look what's happening to employment. And I can tell you this is happening. If you look at the number of independent positions in Toledo, it is down to less than 10%. It happened in a heartbeat. Because everybody was afraid of the power of the ever-merging insurance industry. So if you're thinking, oh, I'll run into independent practice someday, good luck. HMO overheads generally average 15 to 20%. But non-group individual policies, which many on the right suggest we should all own a policy from birth and have to take that policy along with us, and that's one way to do it. Maybe it ought to have a medical savings account as part of it, and that ought to be the way we do this stuff. They're way higher to service. Individual policies require a lot more effort to service 300 individual policies than to go to one company and give them one policy for all 300. And the lowest overheads are when you do 300 million people all at once with one big policy that works for everybody, which is what I'm in favor of. Here's the difference between, in Medicare, the Medicare Advantage plans, which are the for-profit HMOs, and what traditional Medicare spends on administration in dollars per year. Here's what these dudes make. It ain't going to change. When you can make that kind of money, you know, maybe you guys, how many of you thought you might want to be a specialist someday? Maybe make a little more money. Okay. There's your specialty, guys. If you're really interested in medicine, there's your specialty. I can name 3 or 4 CEOs who walked away with hundreds of billions of dollars in stock options. Didn't take care of a single patient, didn't look a sick person in the eyes once they made that switch. Is that what you want? Be my guest. I would suggest you become a hedge fund manager instead. Here's the administrative cost growth. That's the number of growth in doctor on the bottom. That's the growth in non-clinical employees in healthcare. It took off when the insurance industry decided to become hyper-competitive in the US and hyper-complex. 3,000% growth in the number of employees who are non-clinical versus a 200% growth in docs. And nurses are the same graph. Here's what we can say. This is just a new article came out, a recalculation of this. It's approximately $375 billion yearly, if we simplify the financing of healthcare to a single payer with a single set of rules. A single set of payments for hospitals, preferably on a budget so they don't have to go for every aspirin. Right? You give them a budget for their operations, you give them a budget for their capital. And then if they can't stay in budget, you tell them you got to have a new administration because your administration sucks if you can't stay within budget. And you don't let them keep money over to build palaces if the community doesn't want palaces. This cries out for public oversight. This cries out for public oversight. Remember, we'll all be patients someday. That's the most important thing. When you think about how the healthcare system should work, don't think about it as a doctor and how you're going to do. Think about when you're a patient or someone you love as a patient. How do you want it to work? So, my view, real reform versus phony reform. Choice of insurer, that's phony reform. Real reform, any doctor, anywhere in the country. That's what traditional Medicare gave you. You want to go to Mayo? See you, man. You got it. Take your Medicare, go to Mayo. So you can go anywhere with real Medicare. So I want choice of doctor and hospital. I don't want choice of my insurer. I don't want to go to an insurer to decide what doctor I see. I want as close to first dollar coverage because I know that co-pays kill people. Whole other conversation, but that's the data. Co-payments kill people. Security. I'd like it for everyone forever. You're a citizen, we're going to take care of each other. We love each other as neighbors and citizens, we should take care of each other. People go to war for us, put their lives on the line, we should put our lives on the line for our citizens as well. And not let them die unnecessarily because they can't get health care. And we got $375 billion approximately, just in billing costs, so we can say, it doesn't change a penny of what we make. Just the billing savings are there by simplifying the system. We pay everybody, every doctor, the same as we're paying them now. We're not doing badly. I'm certainly not doing badly. Neither will you. There isn't a country in the world that's rich that pays doctors badly. On the other side, co-payments, exclusion on coverage, security, you can't work, can't pay, see ya. Savings, their idea of savings is you get less care. My idea is less of their administrative BS.
Great. I want to bring the microphone.
Yeah. So she got you to speak me up, and then you can ask me questions.
I love that set of slides. What the problem is that with every single slide, I could give a counter argument and provide counter evidence to it. And there isn't time to do that today, right now. So I have to kind of pick and choose which of those I think are the most important issues. Number one was the mention about inequality. And in the talk that I've been giving to the other medical schools before I got here, I have a slide that shows there is no correlation between economic freedom and inequality. There's no correlation at all. It's a scattershot. And if you look at the 20%, how the bottom 20% in the world are doing in the least free countries, they have about 2.5% of that country's resources available to them. If you look at the most free countries, they have about 2.7%, almost 3% of the resources. So it doesn't matter if you're in an economically more free or less free. What makes a difference is the absolute value of what wealth you actually have. And in the least free, the least free countries, the bottom quintile has to live on $1,200 a year. On the most free countries, they're trying to get by on $11,000 a year. A logarithmic difference. It's huge. Economic freedom creates wealth, and it does not create inequality. Another thing that I think is really important, and I have to put my glasses on about this, is the whole idea of profits and non-profits. And saying that the United States is in the most competitive system in the world is absolutely false. And that's why I mentioned that each system throughout the world is a mix of government controls and a free enterprise system. 50% of our dollars come from the government. It is not a free enterprise system. You can't look at us, and I would say, yes, people are suffering,
We have low quality, we have rising costs, but I would say it's because of the lack of the market. So I'm not going to argue at all about the problems of access, the problems of quality, the problems of affordability that exist in our country or throughout the world, but I will disagree on the source of it. The other thing about these, and this is one, I loved having you come here because I never would have looked at the literature about for-profits and not-for-profit hospitals. And it is a meta-analysis, it's a fabulous study, I think it's really good, but looked within the larger context, you have to understand that what is considered profitable completely depends on the regulatory environment within which those businesses, and I would include nonprofits as those businesses, how they're operating. And if you don't have institutions that are preserving property rights, the rule of law, equality before the law, contract enforcement, then the people who are profiting in that system aren't getting what I would call free enterprise profits, right? So we're looking at this bloated third-party payer system which insulates the two economic deciders, the people who are making the choices about how to use our resources, the patient and the physician, are the least aware of the actual true cost benefits that are involved in those decisions that they're making. And the third-party payer, whether it's a private, nonprofit, for-profit, or government, insulates the doctor and the patient from having to consider the resources, so you have to outsource that. Now that, you would say, is probably, that's the benefit. We want somebody else deciding it. We don't want that. So I think there's, like I said, every single one of those slides are things that I would say, but you forgot to address this other issue. So regardless of how this debate ends up, it is incumbent upon you guys to go out and really look at the literature and not take my word for it, not take his word for it, and look at the challenges of anybody who makes any claim. And just like the thing about what is the quality of our care and our infant mortality and then World Health Organizations, there are articles that criticize the data and the analysis that are available through that, and yet it's been repeated so often that we're 37th. Nobody is even questioning that as a data point. Look at the critiques, look at it all, and try and figure out how to make it work. So that's my...
You can put lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig. I mean, I agree with her. Absolutely, go read the literature. I have a peer-reviewed paper in the American Journal of Public Health where I talk about a lot of this stuff. 105 references that you can check out for yourself and see what you think. There are multiple textbooks about health economics. Educate yourself about health economics. I mean, there are diverse opinions in every one of these things. What I can tell you is that these opinions, these resources, are in the minority. There's always debate in healthcare about what's the best way to approach a given problem or illness. We try to come to some sort of consensus. It really, for patients, it needs to be very individualized. You've looked at the literature, you're kind of doing the averages in your head, but that patient's in front of you is a case of one. So I'm sure there are going to be times where you can look at the literature and say, there's some good points here. Does the data suck? Yeah, the data sucks. Why does it suck? We don't have a system. No system, no cost control. We have a sickness care non-system. We're not focused on trying to, as I said, the single thing I would do to improve health more than anything else would be to eliminate poverty. It has nothing to do with health. It's the social and economic causes of health and disease, which are even more important. If we want to save money, that's where to look. We need to look at raising up the most poor among us and educating them better and giving them an infrastructure that make the good path the greased path instead of the bad path the greased path. There's a lot of things that we can do because we're at the far end of this stream. By the time you're getting health care, especially if you're sick, probably something could have been done way earlier for a lot of illnesses if you had a health care system instead of a sickness care non-system. So if nothing else, we need a system. We need something that we agree on works. There's a famous guy who went and taught the Japanese how to beat our butt in automobiles. His name's Deming. And I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I love the statement. Every single system is perfectly designed to give exactly the results that it gives. So I showed you the data. That's what our system is doing. We all need to figure out how to do better.
So I have to, we do have a system. It's a bunch of systems. It's individual systems. And to say that because there's not a central planner telling us exactly how to allocate our resources, and you can't point to here's a specific structure, all you're doing is substituting the plans of a few for the plans of the many. And what I say is happening within the free enterprise system is each of us becomes a part of that decision making. It's a discovery process. It's not some bunch of experts imposing it from top down. And if you looked at what happened in the Soviet Union when they tried to have this central planning system and the purpose of food distribution, people starved. So you look at the extremes, and you have to see where those general trends are. Are we better off in a system that involves more personal choice? Any kind of system where the government is telling us what percentage of our wealth we have to allocate to healthcare over any other kind of consideration is depriving us of being able to say what the best use of those resources are. So it's not true that we don't have a system. We have a system that is based on individual choice. And it's great, though, that we have this in common, that we recognize that that poverty is probably the biggest enemy that we have. And I think that's where the evidence for a free enterprise system is the strongest, is how it is helping us get people out of poverty. So questions, because we're going to run out of time.
I could say 100 other things, so I'm just going to shut up and let you guys ask us questions, because I want you to get the things that you want to know more about out there. And I'm happy, by the way, anybody who wants my email, I'm happy to give you a longer PowerPoint, which includes some of the history of health reform in the U.S. if you want, with notes, if you want to learn more about from my perspective. I'm happy to send you my paper, which was published pre-Obamacare, about how we should do health reform and why I came to the conclusions I came to, with all the data, all 105 references, which you can play around with. But believe me, if I said the sky was blue, they wanted a reference. It was peer-reviewed 3 times, honestly.
So yeah, and just there is stuff. There's a 2014 from JAMA talking about what happens when for-profit hospitals go into, or not-profit change over to for-profit. And they found the only thing that happened was that they had improvements in their financial margins. In other words, they were being more efficient. And there was absolutely no difference in the quality of care, how much of the underprivileged that were being served as well. So there's data on both sides of this. But questions?
I was going to say, ask your statistics professors about meta-analyses. This is one study, she picked one. There were 9 studies there that did the meta-analysis, 19% higher. You can take your pick of those 2 types of statistics, I don't care.
Yeah.
You can always find
look at the
exceptions.
environment that they're working.
I probably could find a time when the sky wasn't blue, right?
Questions, we want questions.
Sunset, the sky's not blue. Right? Yes.
I'll start. From what you guys have said, I assume both of you are opposed to this current insurance-based system that we have for very different reasons. I assume you're opposed to it because in any doctor's office, half of the employees are in the billing area. I assume you would be opposed to it because it distorts the market. But because the doctor and the patient are removed from the financial dealings.
This kind of insurance that we have is the result of perverse incentives that have been built in through our tax system, the subsidies that we have. So it's given us a kind of heavily weighted towards third-party payer system that does separate it. But what actually would show up in the market, I don't know.
And we are unique on the planet that way, by the way, among the rich countries.
We're not.
No one else links their health coverage to employment. We're the only major country that links
That's
our
wrong.
health coverage.
That's absolutely wrong.
Tell me how.
Japan is absolutely more. In fact, you get if you work for an employer, the only choice of insurance you have is the one that's offered through your employer. And in France, you get the vast majority of people are getting their employment, their insurance through their employer.
Both those systems contribute to a single pool of money.
They do, they're subsidized.
They both contribute to a single pool of money. That single pool of money then pays the providers.
And the extent to which that we are tied
And
to
they're all not-for-profit also.
the extent to which we're tied to our employment has to do with the tax system
Yes.
and the way that it's been incentivized so that you get it subsidized. And the richer get subsidized more in our current system. But
Yeah,
did that answer your question?
So I'm still not sure if you think that insurance is the solution or the problem.
What we need is to pay for the complicated, very expensive infrastructure if we want modern healthcare. And we have to figure out how to pay for that infrastructure. Because most of us don't ever want to use it. Everybody who'd like to have 2 open heart surgeries instead of 1, put your hand up if you need it. I mean, the fact is you still, if you did need it, you'd want a place to go and get it and have it at least be accessible to you and not bankrupt your family. So if we're going to have that kind of expensive infrastructure, standing, waiting, ready to come, we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it together because no one person can pay for it. So you've got to pool resources. You must pool resources. Almost 70% of healthcare costs are sunk. Your education is a sunk cost. The hospitals are a sunk cost.
So I gotta answer
the
the
pharmaceutical
question.
manufacturing plants are a sunk cost.
I would say that insurance is part of the answer, not insurance the way it is got this very distorted set of laws and regulations that make it extremely inefficient and ratchet up the costs.
We don't really need insurance companies. They are not a necessary part of our healthcare system. There are places that don't have insurance companies at all, like Sweden. They're not an essential. We've got to have pharmaceutical companies. You got to manufacture equipment that we need and supplies that we need and drugs that we need. So there are for-profit sectors of this environment where I would still say, if we give them the right incentives. Right now, many of those companies, there's some very bad incentives that are out there in front of them, and we can talk that down for a while, especially in pharmaceuticals. But I would not limit, but I don't see what the value added of the American insurance industry is. What I see is harm added in terms of cost.
And in its current structure, I would totally agree with that.
So, hey.
And the question is whether you're going to completely remove individuals' choices of how much you're going to spend on healthcare, given everything else you can spend in your own dollars, which is what ends up happening in the single-payer system. The tax system decides how much of your own resources have to be devoted to healthcare. You don't get a choice in that. Or are we going to try and let that be a discovery process of all of us trying to figure it out through our own individual choices? And then we create this system that actually is more prosperity producing, does hit the people, does give us the resources to be able to attend to the people with the biggest needs at the bottom, the most vulnerable. Or do you do it like you do in Canada, where you always pay for things based on time cost or money cost. In the United States, we do more on money cost. In Canada and in other single payers, they do it more on time cost. And in places like Great Britain, if you're over 65, there is no dialysis. You only have access to those medical treatments that the government decides it's willing and able to pay for. The other big problem, I think, with a lot of these, let's just go based on need, is they totally ignore the real costs. Nobody's making the decision. The reason Medicare, the single-payer system for the elderly in our country, the reason that it has functioned as well as it has is because it has built up $107 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So we're not paying this. We're pushing it all down the road, and every single country, every system is building up more debt of unfunded promises. There's not a single system in the entire world where it's actually working.
I showed you the other systems, read about them.
And you can read how they're actually going bankrupt as well.
I'm unaware of anyone that, how does a national health system go bankrupt unless the country goes bankrupt? You could say it would be bad for inflation because you'd have to print money, you'd have to devote more resources to healthcare, and that might affect other aspects of the economy. I can hear that. But, if you don't do your healthcare, what's the most important thing that you own? It's your life. That's the single most important thing that you own. And as far as I'm concerned, how do you function as an economic being if you don't have a being to begin with, right? So to me, I look at this as kind of fundamental to our freedom. I mean, you will be more free when you don't have to worry all the time, am I not going to be able to pay for something that will keep me alive so I can exercise my freedom? I mean, to me, I think that's the ultimate thing that you own is your own personhood.
And I think it's a fantasy that you don't have to take into consideration costs and cost benefits, and what is the system that is going to give you individually the most power for yourself, both as a physician and advocating for your patients, and as you as a patient, which will give you the most choice and freedom, the most prosperity, and the greatest amount of resources to actually tackle those problems. And I think we're going to have to.
You want the last word? I'll give you the last word.
I mean, I agree with Beth. You know, this is not straightforward and simple stuff. I've been talking about health reform. I was an HMO medical director. You don't necessarily know that, but I did it for about 10 years or so. And I was so horrified by the dirty underbelly of the insurance industry that I took a 1/3 pay cut to get out from under that and build a private practice of it instead. I'm still practicing. Still practicing?
I'm not practicing.
I'm still practicing. Let me tell you, I'm a single payer advocate. I'm practicing. Because this morning I spent 10 minutes on the phone with Buckeye effing Health Plan, okay? Talking to somebody, I have a patient that's got sciatica, bad back, needs neurosurgery, had chest pain, I want to do a stress test, they want him to walk. 10 minutes on the phone to say, hey, the guy's got sciatica. You know, I can't put him on a walking treadmill every day, day after day. So, I think we agree.
Neither of us are going to argue
on
for the
that.
system.
Right, so
Exactly.
change is needed. Decide what kind of change you want.
I apologize, I'm late. My name is David Sohn. I was asked to, my name is David Sohn. I'm an orthopedic surgeon here, and it sounds like we all are probably pretty much are on the same fence of things. I mean, nobody likes insurance companies, you know. And you know, just the one thing that I would kind of throw out there, I mean, this is an ethics debate, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
No,
Okay.
it's
Of
a
sorts.
for profits or not profits.
Oh, okay. You know, just the one problem, you know, with kind of single payer systems is just that of efficiency, which is not really, you know, an ethics, you know, principle. It's not one of the 4 ethical values, but you know, our government does have a proven history of not being able to control costs and being an inefficient deliverer. You know, and an example would be. You know, in this most recent Obamacare, you know, which is really an expansion of who qualifies for Medicaid. You know, we've tried this experiment before. We tried this before for kids. You know, remember the S-CHIP program? S-CHIP was basically a program that was designed to expand the definitions of which children qualify for Medicaid. You know, and their estimate was that we would bring in some people into pediatric Medicaid, and the cost actually ended up being 32 times what the initial estimates are. And that's one problem with the single payer system, is that, you know, government just is inherently not as efficient as private companies are. You know, just think about your local DMV. I mean, you know, think about your experience with them versus when you know, call 10 minutes, you know, to Geico. I mean, what Geico is doing is actually a far more difficult thing to do than registering for licenses. I mean, they have to do actuarial analysis of what kind of risk profile driver you are, and there's an array of options. So government is just not that good. On the other hand, as a practicing physician, no doubt, you know, it is a lot easier when you deal with government insurance, because you don't have to go on the phone and get things authorized and everything like that. To bring things back, I think this is an ethic. I was invited here, you know, as
Fire away, man,
part
I'm
of
listening.
the ethics thing. You know, so I personally think, you know, the thing here that probably falls under ethics the most is that of autonomy. You know, one of the 4 medical principles. You know, the big thing is, you know, one of them is autonomy. You know, the patient can choose and decide. And so, you know, one argument for, you know, insurance companies is it does give people a chance to choose. You know, you can choose how much coverage you want, whether you want coverage or not, and you know, whereas when you have a single payer, it's kind of like if you're a citizen of the country, everyone gets one blank choice, and we all kind of pay into it. And so that's just one thing to consider. I mean, but I agree with you guys. I mean, insurance companies. I mean, it is crazy how much. I mean, it is just it's way out of, so I totally agree with you guys, that, you know, I'm sorry, I only came in for the last, you know, 5 to 7 minutes, but dirty underbelly, yeah, I agree with that, I mean, you know, it's not good.
I could tell you the war stories.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to close, but say,
Yeah.
you wanna say thanks?
Yeah, thank you for you guys for showing up, and let's give them a round of applause for everything. I know that was like a whirlwind of information, but I hope you guys found it as exciting.
And as I said, happy to give an email to anybody who wants the full Monty. You know, I'm happy to give you the data. Please do read about this. It's going to affect your life.